Okay, so yeah, I was just saying that with the charger, there's also like a whole communication protocol with the J117 adapter, and that's controlled by the charger interface board, which I believe will be discussed in more detail later. And then as well, we're also required to have an energy meter between the charging adapter and our charger, I believe, and that will measure basically how much energy you're using to charge the car with. This is just so during the race, you're allowed to charge from sources other than the sun, but you'll receive a penalty, and this is just for measuring how much you do that.
Mm-hmm. Also, can you present, go in presentation mode?
Oh, right, yeah. So it's also recommended that you take a generator with you because you're not always going to be in a location that has an outlet to charge from. So if you do run out of, like if your battery pack runs out of energy and you don't have access to power, then you can set up a generator and use that to charge. I mentioned before that you are required, so I think overnight, you're required to secure your battery box so that you can't swap out cells or anything like that. So they call that the impound. So you just have to have, your design has to accommodate that so that you can seal it, basically. So in addition, those are most of the electrical regulations, but then you're also limited. There's other regulations about how big the car can be. So there's length, width, and height dimensions listed there that your car has to fit within. The main body of your car shouldn't be moving really when you're driving. So only like the steering and the wheels can move. You're allowed to have small sections of your aero body move with the wheels. So I think this is more common for single occupant vehicles where they'll sometimes have wheel fairings that will move with the wheels for better aerodynamics. You have to have minimum ground clearance. Lighting it's related to the electrical system, so we have to make sure that the lights are bright enough to be seen from 30 meters away. But then there's a whole bunch of other regulations about what exact angles you have to be able to see the lights at. And this applies to all your lights. So you'd have daytime running lights, signal lights, brake lights, and then also your BPS fault light. Then there's another set of regulations for the driver visibility. So they have to be able to see out the windshield in certain directions and distances. The windshield has to have some sort of clearing mechanism for rain. So usually that's just like a hydrophobic coating. The driver has to be able to see behind them. So in a traditional car, you'd have mirrors to see, but that is not as good for aerodynamics. So we have cameras in our car that will be used to see around the vehicle. And then you have to have driver ventilation. It can be passive, but then you usually don't get as good of airflow as if you have fans to augment the airflow.
I think some of the regs also mentioned that we have to have airflow from external into the main domain, but we could also use fans.
Yeah. So egress is another one where if the car rolls or one of the doors gets blocked, you have to be able to, all the occupants have to be able to get out of the vehicle within a certain amount of time. So I believe every passenger also has to have at least 2 openings that they can get out of that are at least 90 degrees apart. So this would usually be the driver's side and passenger side doors. Mm-hmm. So one of the I guess one of the scrutineering tests is if they'll point to a random direction and everyone has to get out, and they'll time how quickly the passengers get out of the vehicle. Mm-hmm.
If it's your primary door or exit, then you have to get out in 10 seconds, and 15 seconds for your secondary, which is that what that note meant.
So each of the drivers has to have a minimum amount of weight, because otherwise there would be an unfair advantage to teams that have lighter drivers. So if you have a driver who's less than 80 kilograms, they need to have a ballast box that has extra weight in it. And that has to be within a certain proximity to the passenger. Each team is also given like a data logger that will record your vehicle location and speed during ASC.
It's self-powered.
Okay, yeah, it's self-powered. Each solar car has to have markings on it to show like the team number, institution, sponsors, event logo, national flag, and front signage. There's also a bunch of mechanical regulations that relate to all these sections. I don't know them off the top of my head, and I won't go into them in too much depth. But basically, there's details about the aero body, year array and clearance, tires and wheels, cockpit. So the occupants have to have a certain amount of space, and I think in the past you've needed to have a certain amount of like foam in the doors to provide cushioning in a crash. Fasteners, brakes have to meet certain regulations, park and brake, steering, and you have to have a tow point. So during FSGP, when you're on the track, if your car breaks down, you have to stop it, and you need to get towed back to the start, or back to wherever you can fix it. So you need to provide a spot that they can tow it from. So this would have to be connected to the chassis or some other structural part. And then there's also dynamic stability. So there's a bunch of tests to just see how well the car performs, I guess, during scrutineering.
Yeah, those are pretty cool. You get to see the car do like a figure eight, slalom, brakes, and the stability at a certain speed. So
yeah, there's occupant requirements as well. So they want to make sure everyone's safe. You have to have at least 2 drivers and a maximum of 4, and then you can only have a maximum of 8 passengers. Like I mentioned before, there's ballast to make sure that the total weight that you're carrying is relatively the same between each team. All the drivers need helmets, or all the passengers, need helmets. Any occupant that's in the vehicle needs a helmet. Everyone needs shoes. There's limitations as to how long you can spend in the car, so you can't spend more than 6 hours in the car per day. And that's the same for passengers or drivers. You need to have water with you. And then there has to be communications at all times. So you can use cell phones that are in hand-free mode. And then usually you'd also have like radios as well. And during ASC, you would have like a lead and chase car that you'd be in communication with, whereas at FSGP, you would usually have like a central location where everything's set up, and that's where you'd usually set up like telemetry and have access and like communication with the car there.
Yeah, just for ASC, we have like a push to talk button, just that sits on the steering wheel, so the driver can just press on it, and that meets spec requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And then the last section of the regulations are operations, and this is really how the scoring and event kind of goes through. So it's just important to like note this is especially useful for strategy, because there are a bunch of equations for scoring that if we account for, we'll probably get better points, and it helps us make decisions. So let's go through this. Right, so the actual tour. The tour this summer was supposed to start in Independence, Missouri, and end in Boise, Idaho. And it was kind of shorter than the last one, which was in 2018. I forget where it started and ended, but in to make up for that, this tour was supposed to have a component where you could take a loop and gain more miles by doing so, because it was shorter. But yes, this is postponed to next summer, so I'm not sure if this route will be maintained. But in any case, the way the tour works is the format is that there is a series of stage points. So every day, your goal is to start at like 9 a.m. or whenever the cars are like let go. And then everyone starts at a different time based on your performance and qualifiers. You might get an earlier start than other cars, but the goal is to reach the next stage by the evening time. So around, I think it was 6 p.m. is the kind of cutoff time. And so the way it works is that you'll have a bunch of support vehicles accompanying your car. So a lead, a chase. You can have your trailer vehicle as well, but it has to be at least at 1 kilometer away from your other vehicles. And you can have a scout vehicle, which kind of goes in front of all the vehicles and checks to make sure road conditions are safe for your car. And in between is the solar car. It's kind of sandwiched in between, so that it's not going into a terrain it can't handle, because that would not be good. And then during the tour, you have to make sure that you have constant radio communication, like Liam mentioned. But during this component, cell phones cannot be your primary source of communication, which kind of makes this is the real reason we have to have other types of communication like radio. It's because LTE might not hold up in every location. This is like on the Oregon Trail or in the middle of America, so we can't rely on that. It's extremely important to have communication with the rest, or with the other support vehicles, because like in many cases, things that happen in the solar car, the only way to like fix them is to get everyone to like stop and fix whatever is making the car break down. So communication is essential. And then just other regs, like everyone has to have team uniforms. There has to be a timing, so timekeeping. That's another component of this race, how many miles you can complete within a certain time frame. Tour hours, like I mentioned, the tour route. Everyone gets a master route at the beginning of the competition. And then, yeah, these things I mentioned. And then there's also checkpoints during the middle of the days where you just have to stop at a certain spot for 45 minutes. You can use that time to charge your array or charge your car with your array, which is what people do. And then you can also have overnight stops, which are basically at each stage. It's kind of like an overnight stop. You don't drive during the nighttime. So then when you finish your stage, there's just a bunch of administrative stuff you have to report back to the event coordinators. And then there is something called loops, which are, if you reach a destination early, you can get more miles by making a loop and then coming back to the destination. The way it works is that if you aren't able to get to the stage you need to in time, I believe that's kind of like your drop-off point. Like, they might let you just continue the rest of the race, but in terms of scoring, that is where your score will be taken. That's how many miles you have traveled, because for that day, your car couldn't make it, which is not ideal. And then we have impound is really important during this race, because they want to make sure everything is fair and teams aren't changing their cells or adjusting their pack or charging it when not required. So it has to be impounded, and there are certain impound time regulations you have to follow. And by the way, all these regulations are important because they will give us penalties if we don't follow them, and penalties really deduct from our score. So there's also traffic laws. We're literally driving on the highway, so or the freeway, but we have to make sure we're following basic traffic laws. that goes without saying. Oh, that's supposed to say drafting. This is what happens when you type this up at 4 a.m. So yeah, you can't draft, you can't push, you can't you push your vehicle when it's in race mode. So during like scrutineering, you push around your vehicle so you don't have to drain battery or cycle the battery. But once your competition starts in any situation, there's no more pushing the vehicle. It has to move on its own. So yeah, you can't do that during this competition. You can't draft either. That's just a safety concern. Trailering, you just have to make sure you keep your trailer caravan a kilometer away from your main car, and then you have to consider your own lodging. And accidents are real. They have to be brought to ASC's attention as soon as they happen, and sometimes they need inspection, both as a safety standard, just to make sure that they aren't like going to cause more problems, or verify that more problems won't occur if you get back on the road, as well as I think there's something with scoring to do there. And then alterations and repairs, you'll have to stop and do them, of course. So it'll cut into your time, and you may get penalties depending on the alteration / repair that you'll have to communicate with AC again. So that's kind of how the tour is laid out, and it's a really cool competition. So another thing is, since we're a multi-occupant vehicle, there's certain judging that we get. So scoring is based on this equation, which is where D is the total person mile distance, E is total external energy use, C is the completion factor, T is target speed, and P is the practicality score. And so they kind of give equations for the letterings. So D, that's just the amount of distance you travel per person. So you want to make sure you get, like, for all the, you want to make sure the car is always fully loaded with 4 people, because that gives you like a huge advantage, right? Because you collect miles for every person. And so having 4 people, if our car goes to competition next summer, and we are one of the only 4 people vehicles that compete, it gives us a really huge leg up, because we're kind of doubling that factor. And then E is the number of times the energy storage system is charged. So basically, whenever we have to stop to charge the pack because we don't have enough energy from the sun to continue, the meter charging will basically be used to tell the event officials for this judgment to factor in. And then P is our practicality score. So it's kind of subjective and objective. This is kind of funny. This is the score we got in 2018, that blue screenshot on the right. There's even a category called je ne sais quoi, so that's kind of funny. I guess that's their subjective ratings. And then it's translated to a 0 to 1 scale, so it can be used as a multiplier. And then we have the C is a total okay, so C takes into account our penalties, and you can't see it in this slide, but another slide, we got a lot of penalties during our 2018 race, and that really deducted from our score. So this is the equation they use. And then finally, it's speed requirements that have to be taken into consideration for AC for a multi-occupant vehicle. There's a 35 mile per hour limit. For WC, or sorry, for a FSGP, I think it's 30 miles per hour. And so if we travel at 35, we're basically good. Anything 35 and above is good. Usually people will stay at 35 because that's the most efficient, like driving slowest is the most efficient for making sure you use your energy in your battery well. So usually we stay at speed limit, but if you're under, that gives you a disadvantage that will be factored into the score. Right, and then like those are regulations, especially for the tour part for ASC, but FSGP qualifier also has its own set of regulations for scoring as well. So the format, it's a 3-day closed course track competition. Actually, I think scrutineering is 2 days, not 3 days. So sorry about the confusion. But anyways, scoring is it's the same as the tour for scoring, except it only takes into account practicality, person mile distance, and the overall speed. So phone can be the primary source of communication for this because it is a closed track, and LT will be available, or mobile communication will be available. And then safety, there's certain regulations for the safety equipment you have to have at the pit stop, so that when your car stops, or there is a fault that occurs, the car will stop and you'll be able to tow back to a safe place for repairs. And then there's timing, because this is a lapped race. There has to be a timer from our team that coordinates with the timer from another team, and they literally like are the ones recording how long it takes for each of us to complete a lap. So that's one of the positions you could be and during the competition. So the requirements for ASC qualification during this qualifiers is that you have to travel 330 kilometers in one day, or if you do the qualification through 2 days, you have to travel 495 kilometers. And so during 2018, we met this requirement, so we were able to compete. But yeah, we took a huge penalty because of the brakes test. And so another regulation is that each of your driver needs to drive a minimum of 85 kilometers. That's just like a good way for them to like make sure that each driver is like good and comfortable enough to get to the real road. So the charging and impound is the same as ASC regs. There's a time and they have to be in. And driving procedures, you have to, if you're going to pass a car, you have to honk and then pass on the left, and then you have to follow the speed limits. You can't be following way too closely. That's a safety concern as well. And you cannot push your car during this competition when it starts. That's just unfair. So all driving or mobility has to happen from your main pack. And then during a breakdown, which happens very often, actually, like last competition, there was a really big slope like at the beginning of the race. So a lot of cars would get like stuck on the slope because they couldn't make it up. It was yeah. So when the cars had to stop because of that, because that track was pretty large, there was a car that kind of went to go assess the situation where you would hop in and then you would have to push your car back to the pit stop to figure out what the issue is or tow it back. And then finally, operations, there is a bunch of flags during the competition that the driver has to be aware of. I didn't list them, but they essentially give you updates about how the event is going. If you have time left for more laps, you will also be in constant communication with your team. So they should also be updating drivers on this, but it is a good indication for the driver. If something immediate has happened, there's like a black flag, which means everyone has to stop. Because there are a lot of safety concerns that could happen. Last competition, I think there's like a random car. Some guy just like decided to drive his car on the track, and then like I think the like administration was like chasing them for like a while, so everything had to stop then. Yeah, that's kind of funny. Okay, and right, so penalties. This is like a huge part. So if you see that image, we did not do well for a penalty time. That's like 10 hours of penalty. So yeah, that was not good. But that's because we get penalties for the scrutineering issues. So we can get pre-lap losses, especially for qualifiers. So in case like some issues are maybe your car is out of spec by like size and body dimensions, and that'll give you, they actually have very specific penalties for each centimeter over limit, like a lap per centimeter or something. It's crazy like that. And so that really takes away from your qualifications, and then for ASC you're put at a disadvantage if you can qualify and the position you're allowed to race in. So yeah, so basically any rule has like a penalty associated, especially the following, so like speeding, traffic violations, not allowing other cars to pass, support vehicles, impeding the tour. Basically, yeah, your support vehicles can't be in the way of other cars on the road, as well as other solar cars. No drafting, pushing, no improper ballast. Yeah, you can't drive outside of the times that are listed. Like you have to stop at whatever stage you're at. And then, yeah, you can't charge your battery. Like you get penalties for charging from a wall. You want to do that as little as possible. And then disturbing the battery seal. So they seal your battery to make sure you can't update your BMS system, firmware, or flash anything like during scrutineering after they figure out that your BPS system works. So you can't disturb that. That'll be a penalty. And then failure to impound. That's like a lap per minute because there's impound times. side specs, fasteners, penalties, parking brake, roll cage, overweight battery, and ignoring BPS faults. And like in general, all these rules have been set in place to make sure your car is safe, and it makes sense to drive in this competition. None of them are unfair. So like you don't want penalties, and like a drive for making sure you don't get penalties is like the fact that scoring will go down a lot, but your car should already not have penalties anyway, so that's just not good. And I think there's another part to operations. Where is this it? Yeah, so that's like a really high level breakdown of the entire regulations, but the really important part for us is the scrutineering aspect, which is what we're getting tested on when we show up. And if we get delayed with our scrutineering and we don't pass in time, that like it's a real time crunch because we only have a couple days to do that. So we won't get to qualifiers, and yeah, that would not be good. So Liam could talk about this.
So yeah, when you arrive, you basically have a couple days to do scrutineering, and they give you a schedule. So you're essentially assigned a time slot that you can go and do each kind of scrutineering, and it's all listed here. It's common that not every team will be ready for each kind of scrutineering when their time slot is assigned. So you can trade with other teams so that if you're ready to do your electrical scrutineering but not your mechanical, then you can do that first. So yeah, these are essentially the list of things that like need to be tested before you can, or like these are the stations that you have to go to complete scrutineering. So there's a station for testing your array. There's a station for driver and passenger registration, driver operations, lights and vision, body and sizing, electrical, battery protection, mechanical, dynamics, and support. I'm going to go into more detail about like the array scrutineering, electrical, and battery protection, because those are the ones that are mostly related to the hardware team. The other ones are fairly straightforward. So like lights and vision, that's just measuring that your lights can be seen at the proper distance and that they can be seen at the proper angles. Body and sizing, again, they're just measuring the size of your car. Mechanical, there's it's a little more involved, but it's just basically making sure that all your mechanical, like all the mechanical regulations are followed. And then dynamics is where you would actually like have the car do some, like do the solemn tests or figure eight or braking tests. And then support as well. That's just going over some of the supporting parts of it. There's a link here that you can, like, if you want to see the full list of things after, you can click on that link and it'll show you the basically like the marking sheet that they use to evaluate you. That was used, I think, in 2018. I don't know. I don't think it's changed since then. So basically at the array station, this isn't really like a test to see if your car, like it's not really like a pass or fail one. It's more of they'll just test your array and see how much power it's generating, what's the voltage and what's the current. So for this one, you basically need to take your car to the station and disconnect everything from the array. And then they'll connect meters to your array and measure those three things. I think they also measure the temperature of your array as well. But yeah, this is an image of us when we were doing the array scrutineering at FSGP last year. Yeah, it was kind of interesting because as we drove the car to FSGP in the trailer, all the aero body panels broke off and some other parts were damaged as well. So the battery management system was also damaged. So that's why the car is kind of in pieces. So at the electrical station, it's essentially just a person inspecting your system, and like they'll basically ask you questions to test your understanding of your system and also to convince them that it's safe. So they'll check to make sure that your solar array is the only power source, that your batteries have adequate ventilation, your battery enclosure is isolated from like all the high voltage conductors and everything are isolated from the rest of the car. They'll make sure that you have an external power switch that works. Any shock hazards have to be labeled and protected so that you can't accidentally touch high voltage stuff.
They also have to be a certain like text width, and like last comp, like we got in trouble because they weren't the like large enough text size. So yeah, that was kind of funny.
They will check that your batteries actually match the form. So when you're submitting your PVDRs and VDRs, you have to submit a battery approval form. That'll just basically specify which battery chemistry you're using. And so, and I guess what the safe operating conditions are. So you have to show them that the batteries that you're using are actually the same ones that you got approved. You have to show them that the battery pack is actually mounted securely and isn't going to come loose or anything. Your supplemental batteries also have to have they have to be within an enclosure that also provides isolation and is secure. And then also you have to you have to show that it's only your supplemental batteries are only powering the things that they're allowed to power. And then you have to you have to show them that the main fuse meets the regulations and that everything that's connected to the main battery pack has is either fused or current limited. So power switch, the driver has to be the only person capable of controlling the car, basically. So they have to be able to turn it on and off. And then also in an emergency, they have to be able to turn it off and trigger a BPS fault. All your electrical connections and cables have to be the right size and follow the regulations. And same thing with the accelerator and cruise control. So you have to show them that it will deactivate automatically when you press the brakes, and then also the accelerator returns to the 0 position. So yeah, these are all just things that they'll just check to make sure that it's following the regulations. But yeah, you have to prove it. You have to convince them that it works. So the battery protection scrutineering is another one where like this is basically they'll test it and you either pass or fail. And so basically what they have is a power supply and DMM, and they'll check for things like over voltage, under voltage, over current, over temperature. And for over temperature, you have to test it when you're charging and discharging. So the whole test procedure can be found at the link at the bottom. But essentially, you have to make a special harness that will connect to your battery management system, and all the voltage taps will go to like each of the cells that they're supposed to, except for one of them will be disconnected, and they'll connect that to the power supply and the DMM, and then they'll gradually adjust the voltage until it approaches the under voltage limit or over voltage limit, and then they'll check when your car faults, and I believe you're allowed to have plus or minus 0.01 volts error. If you do pass, like for lithium ion, it's usually around 4.2 volts that is the over voltage condition. So if you did set it and it actually triggered a BPS fault at say like 4.1 volts, and you want it to be higher, you can request. You're allowed one request to test it again and shift it a little bit, and that just lets you get more usable energy out of your pack. Overcurrent is a similar test, but it's usually, well, we have a shunt resistor, so we can't actually, we're using a shunt resistor, so we can't actually pass 100 amps or more of current through the resistor to get I guess trigger a fault. So what we have to do instead is connect I guess voltage taps to the to the amplification stages that happen after it. So usually, like with a shunt resistor, you would have current passing through a really small resistor, like it has a really small resistance, but it's actually fairly large because of the power dissipation. And then there'll be a very small voltage generated across the resistor because it has a really small resistance. And then that voltage is amplified, and there's an ADC to read it. So we have voltage taps there after the main amplifier. So we can connect voltage taps there and use a power supply to adjust the current, and then you can use like scalar ratios to calculate how much current you're simulating. So then you have to show them that it will trip in an overcurrent situation. And then over temperature, you'd have a thermistor or whatever other temperature. So we use thermistors to measure the temperature of our pack. So all you'd have to do is take one of those, and they'll wrap it in a heating blanket thing. And then I think they have their own thermistor or thermocouple inserted, and they'll measure the temperature and see when your pack faults. So, and then for this test, you have different limits usually when you're charging and discharging the pack. So you have to measure, you have to pass screening for both those cases. And then once you passed, you need to prevent further adjustments to be made to your battery management system. So this is where the battery box have to be secured and locked, and then you also have to put like a seal on the controller boards that we have in there so that it can't be reprogrammed, and that effectively prevents your battery management system from changing during the competition. So yeah, these are just a bunch of the images from previous competitions then. So I think most of these are from last year's FSGP. So on the left, that was after the competition was finished and we were given our awards. We placed third place last year. And then there's I guess it's just a lot of fun during the competition. So on the top right, you can just see that they're just skateboarding, I guess. There's a lot of time to hang out and do stuff. Bottom right,
it's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Bottom right, it looks like they're fixing the car, although I don't think that was last year.
That was in 2018.
Okay, yeah. So I wasn't there, but I'm assuming they're fixing the car.
Me neither. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, these are just more pics. Like this is from the tour itself, which is like, it was so beautiful, and they got really good like drone pics. And then the top left is like doing the figure eight. And then the next slide, there's a video of the slalom race. I don't know if it'll play. And you have to do the slaloms in like a certain time, so your driver has to be pretty comfortable with that as well. So you have to really train your driver to be able to go at that speed and turn without feeling the fear of rolling over, which does happen, by the way. Like rolling over during this happens more often than it should, and that's based on the center of gravity. And then people get really tired of these competitions and just sleep on the ground, just pass out, because like last comp we had battery BMS issues, so like the hardware team was like up for 3 days without sleep, and then we did this thing where we just put tools on sleeping people. So yeah, it's a lot of fun though. Like even